It's finally 2021, everybody. It's February 2nd as of right now, and I'm really excited because that means that spring is coming, which means I'll be able to start my seeds in my garden soon. Which reminds me that I never made an update about how my bean garden turned out. So, starting with week 1 after seeds were planted outside, we had growth. We had my tomatoes that were in pots for a while looking kind of spindly, and we had peas that were growing, and I'm really glad that I had gotten my squash plants into the ground because they needed the space. I'm really excited at this time about how the tomatoes were looking because they were getting the support that they needed from the branches that I put in with them. And I was really excited about how my peas were looking, and my pepper plants were still really dinky, and I felt really bad for them because they were just growing super slow. We had a few lettuces coming up. They certainly are small but eager to get that sunshine. And also we had our pumpkin plants, which the leaves were actually pretty big. I was surprised. At 6 weeks, things were looking pretty bushy. As you can sort of tell, the tomatoes were getting their fruits on them. The peas were looking pretty tall and spindly. They were reaching for those strings that were set up just for them. And you can see a couple of the green beans that were growing. Every bed looks like it's pretty full here. But then when we take a closer look, we can see that there was some damage. We started having issues with slugs because of rain. But our little pepper plant is doing pretty good. He has a couple damaged holes too in one of the leaves. And then in the apple tree next to it, we've got some little baby apples that are starting to grow. I did notice that I had to replace the strings that were holding up the tomatoes. They were starting to cut in, and one of them actually ended up falling over because the wind was too strong. The squash is looking a lot bigger, and as you can see, we have some little slug poison pellets that we had sprinkled around the garden. Unfortunately, as you can see, most of the peas have been eaten off, and you can see the cow peas that were remaining. This last bed, all that's in there is pumpkins. There is nothing else. Even the lettuces have been eaten by those slugs. We also had some damage to the weed fabric that was around the beds. Not sure how that happened, but it was a little disheartening to see. At 9 weeks, we seemed to be doing a lot better. There was a little bit of recovery from the slug damage. The tomatoes are doing pretty fantastic at this point. And you can see that some of the green beans survived, and any regrowth by the peas was just taking its time. Our little pepper plant, he's still pretty small, but at this point he was starting to try and make little flowers. Of course, at 9 weeks, the apples aren't all that much bigger. And then, as you can see, we have our green beans that are starting to make their bean pods. This one's really tiny and cute. And one of our tomatoes was actually donated to me by my friend. It was a mystery tomato plant that she had, and it turned out to be quite a large breed of tomato. It fits in my hand pretty well. And the squash were starting to grow their fruits, and by the time we went to go pick them, they were not mature, and they were still really hard. the only way we could eat them was by putting them in soup to make them soften up nicely. As you can see, our cowpeas we're trying to fill out. We didn't get many peas off of them, but the ones that we did, we just put them in soup. And the pumpkins way down at the end were starting to flower at this point, and they were really pretty. We only ended up getting about 2 pumpkins off of them, and we had to cook them almost right away because they were starting to get soft really fast because they were not mature either. Overall, with the plants that did survive, we ended up getting a pretty good crop off of everything. We were able to take the amount of tomatoes we got, and half of them we used to make a small batch of tomato sauce, and the other half we diced up and used them in recipes. When it came to the squashes, we only got about 3 squashes off them that were big enough, and like I said, they were really hard. When it came to the beans, we got a good amount of beans off of them. I did not see because my husband ate them all when I was away. But he said that they were really good and they lasted him about 2 days, where he just kind of boiled them and ate them with dinner. Unfortunately, all the apples ended up dropping to the ground, and we think the deer ate them before we got to them. We only got about, I think it was 5 apples total, and they were very small. So we think they might be a type of crab apple. For the seeds for the 2021 garden, I have some seeds that I already grew from, and I have some seeds that are brand new to me. So seeds that I already grew from are rosy basil, thumbelina carrots, which are so small. The ones that I got to grow to what I think are maturity ended up being able to sit on my thumbnail. They're so cute. The cherry bell radishes, the mezclin gourmet spicy mix lettuce, green cucumbers, which unfortunately they took a long time to grow, so they ended up dying before we were able to get any cucumbers off of them because of frost, and German chamomile, which, because I ended up starting those kind of late in the season too, we got 1 flower off of them, so unfortunately I wasn't able to save any for tea. For seeds that are new to me that I also want to grow, we have Sweetie Pole cherry tomatoes, Purple Beauty sweet peppers, Birdhouse gourds, Triunfo Violetto pole beans, which are going to be really cool because they grow purple. We have the Ford Hook Giant Swiss Chard and the Premier Blend Kale, which I think is going to be really fun because you can take those, put them in the freezer, and then you can save them for things like soup and casserole. When you take them out of the freezer, you can just chop them up, put them in right away, and they end up being really good for those things. Some things that I grew that I really enjoyed were the Blue Lake 274 bush beans. They survived the onslaught from snails and slugs, and they still produced a good crop. And the Best Boy hybrid tomato from Burpee Seeds. Now, this is kind of a mixed feeling thing for me because out of the entire package of seeds, only 3 of them germinated, which was really sad. But they grew really well, and they produced a lot of tomatoes for us. The other thing that I would definitely grow if I had to again was whatever that mystery tomato was that my friend gave me, because they were nice big tomatoes and they were pretty juicy. As for seeds that I grew that I'm not going to try right away again are basically the peas and the lima beans. Unfortunately, the Wando, Alaska, Pink Eye, Purple Hull cow peas, all of those peas got decimated by the slugs and couldn't recover. and the lima beans were just mowed down because there's so few lima beans in a package. So I think I will wait until I figure out how to control this slug and snails problem before I start trying to grow those again. In December, I started my purple beauty peppers. I started 6 seeds, and 4 of them actually germinated and grew. And then unfortunately, one of them died, I believe, to a fungus that attacked the roots. So currently I have 3 growing. They're doing really well, and I'm hoping, because I want to keep them in pots so that I can bring them inside during the winter, that I will get a better crop this year than I did in 2020, because they took the ones that I was growing were a bell pepper that my mom had seeds for, and they just took so long to mature that by the time they started to grow little peppers, they ended up getting killed by frost. So hopefully growing them in pots and bringing them inside once it starts getting colder weather, they'll be able to make their peppers for a longer season, and I'll just have to make sure that I pollinate them with a paintbrush. And now that it is February, I'm going to start my tomatoes just like I did last year. The tomatoes that I grew, I had started in February, and they had a nice big crop of tomatoes. And these cherry tomatoes that I want to grow this year, I'm going to start now, and hopefully we will have lots of cherry tomatoes because I believe they grow faster than the larger slicing tomatoes. I hope that my experience gives you some ideas for what you could do for your garden, and that you have a good growing season.